Tonight on Primetime, Greenland is back at the center of global attention. Washington's renewed interest has reignited old debates, unsettling allies and sharpening focus on sovereignty, security, and who shapes the future of the High North. The Arctic may be thawing, tensions are not. Good evening. European leaders are making it clear Greenland is not on the market after fresh signals of interest from US President Donald Trump about acquiring the island. A-News's Anita Sharma has more.
Welcome to this day in Europe as alarmed allies walk a tightrope, attempting to protect Greenland while trying not to antagonize U.S. President Trump's goal to annex the Danish autonomous territory. They reiterate that the mineral-rich Arctic island is not for sale, and EU Council President Antonio Costa says any attempt to claim it would be contrary to international law and alliance principles. Last night, U.S. Secretary of State Marco Rubio said he would meet with the leaders of Denmark next week, but signaled no retreat from Trump's aim to take over the island. He said if any U.S. president identified any threat to the national security of his country, they retained the option to address it through military means. But he also said he prioritized diplomatic resolutions. Speaking at Wednesday's news briefing, White House Press Secretary Caroline Leavitt stated that the U.S. is actively discussing the purchase of Greenland and that Trump's first option has always been diplomacy. She pointed out that the idea to acquire Greenland predates the Trump administration going back to the 1800s. Earlier in the day, France's Foreign Minister Jean-Noël Barrot said he spoke to Rubio, who, quote, discarded the idea that what just happened in Venezuela could happen in Greenland. Barrot was heading to a meeting with his German and Polish counterparts to discuss this issue and said they want to take action but, quote, want to do so together with our European partners. However, according to Reuters, a senior European official said Denmark must lead efforts to coordinate a response and that it has not yet told its European allies what kind of concrete support Denmark and Greenland need. This week, Denmark's prime minister said Greenland should not fear an imminent American takeover and that they wanted to boost ties with the U.S. He also warned, however, that any attack by the U.S. would spell the end of NATO. For A News, I'm Anita Sharma in Arnhem, Netherlands.
Joining me now to discuss this further is Newsweek contributor Peter Roth, who's joining us from Washington, D.C. Peter, always very nice to see you. Help us sort the facts from all the fuss then, please, on this. From a US perspective, what does this represent a sort of sensible strategic necessity, or is it more about some kind of diplomatic provocation?
Good evening, and it's always good to be with you. I think it is strategic sensibility. Leaving aside the question of mineral resources, the Russians and the Chinese are very active laying down markers in the Arctic. The U.S. also has some stretched capability monitoring the Russian submarines coming out of the North Sea into the Atlantic. Additional U.S. presence in Greenland would go a long way towards better U.S. surveillance, which means better global security, which means America is better able to protect Europe. Unfortunately, because of some ill-chosen words by a member of the White House staff, the American media, the global media even, has blown this up into a crisis in which the United States is imminently threatening to invade Greenland and take it from Denmark. And that's just not what's going on.
And we've often seen over the years, haven't we, with President Trump, that sometimes his negotiating strategy is to start off with a very aggressive initial move and then compromise on something more sort of conciliatory and reasonable at a later stage. Do you think there could be some of that strategy in this? That at the moment there's all this talk of invasion and ownership, very dramatic terms, but actually what he's really looking for is some kind of long-term access, some kind of partnership style agreement?
I hesitate to say yes, only because Trump places such a high value on unpredictability. But as we saw in Gaza, the initial proposal looked very different from the peace agreement that was ultimately signed, and which is being implemented slowly and with difficulty, as should be expected. But it didn't involve scooping up all of the Palestinians living in Gaza, moving them to Saudi or Egypt, and then moving in with bulldozers to clear cut all the rubble and build a Las Vegas style Gaza on the river, on the Mediterranean. And so I would hesitate to say that Trump is not serious about buying Greenland and isn't serious about everything he's saying. But does this make it easier as a compromise for the U.S. to exercise its rights under treaty to build additional military installations under Greenland, on Greenland? Yeah, probably.
And there are many people across Europe, analysts and, to be fair, politicians, who were suggesting, Peter, that any activity at all by the US in Greenland would then be, quote, the end of NATO, the death of NATO. Do you think that's a bit short-sighted, though? Couldn't this potentially offer an opportunity for NATO to strengthen its activity in that northern part of Europe?
It's not short-sighted, and if you'll forgive me, it's stupid. It's just stupid. I agree with the people who say that a U.S. military occupation of Greenland over the objections of the Danes is the end of NATO. That's an attack by one NATO country on another NATO country. And all the other NATO member countries would be required to come to Denmark's aid. And so I agree, that's the end of NATO. But that's not what we're talking about. As the setup package clearly explains, President Trump is unwilling to take the military option off the table because we reserve the right to come to the aid of the people in Greenland if they're attacked by somebody else. And we don't want anyone to misinterpret. You know, wars have started over misinterpretations. The Korean War started because then Secretary of State Dean Acheson gave a speech outlining what the U.S. defense perimeter was in Asia, and he forgot to include Korea. And that gave the North the green light to invade. So we don't want to say anything that's going to unnecessarily provoke somebody.
Peter, just...
Trump has strengthened NATO.
Sorry, carry on.
I was just going to say, Trump has strengthened NATO. By forcing the NATO countries to take a good hard look at their commitment to the alliance, Trump has strengthened NATO. They are paying more attention to NATO. They are participating in NATO. They are funding NATO at higher numbers. Not high enough, but higher numbers. They are no longer neglecting NATO, confident that they are secure under America's nuclear umbrella in a post-Cold War, post-Soviet Europe.
The question, Peter, of what Trump wants with Greenland, why he wants it so badly, is one that's being debated all over social media. How do you see it? Is it pretty straightforward, or is there more to it than perhaps we might imagine?
I think that Trump sees himself as a expansionist leader. He wants to put America into space permanently for good. He wants to put America on the moon. And so the idea that he wants to expand America's geographic footprint is not surprising. He talked in the 2024 campaign of his new admiration for President William McKinley, who is known for many things, mostly for being assassinated. But it was under McKinley that America fought the war with Spain that resulted in the Philippines, Cuba, and other parts of the Caribbean becoming, at least temporarily, American territories, creating the American empire under Theodore Roosevelt. I think Trump sees himself on that grand stage. He's a builder, he's a developer. And as he's built casinos and golf courses and luxury apartment buildings around the world, so too he seeks to build on the footprint of the United States.
And we've spoken a lot about the opportunities for strategic defence advantages, for possibly for energy as well. But what about conservation? Could there also be an opportunity? I mean, there are many that would say President Trump isn't a natural, not someone you naturally think of when it comes to conservation. But do you think there could be some conservation advantages to more activity taking place in Greenland?
I think that Greenland is an undiscovered country, that its best days are ahead of it, that because of its location, because of its climate, it is not developed the way it might possibly be. If you regard first world development, economic advancement, population growth, if you regard that as progress, as I do, and as I think the president does. And so there's an opportunity for resource conservation alongside resource cultivation, and for potentially turning Greenland into a destination. I mean, people forget that at one point, for example, Alaska was a destination. People would save up for a year in order to buy the supplies they needed, to go to the Yukon, to prospect for gold, and potentially get rich. I think the same potential exists in a place like Greenland. All the markers are there. We need to explore the exploitation and cultivation of those resources to see if they match expectations. I think that's probably easier to do with Greenland as an American territory, because America has the intellectual know-how, the engineering knowledge, and the financial capital available in ways that Denmark doesn't.
And Peter, just going back to when President Trump first started speaking publicly about Greenland, I think it's fair to say that in Europe, certainly, he was mocked by many, dismissed by most. Do you think that the EU failed to spot the strategic importance of Greenland early enough?
I think the EU failed to spot a lot of things. The strategic importance of Greenland is way down on the list. I think that, frankly, that what comes out of Brussels in terms of economic and cultural regulation is a net negative for European living standards and for growth and progress in Europe. And I think the survey data bears me out on this, that's the primary reason that the Brits who voted for Brexit voted to leave the EU. It wasn't because of uncontrolled immigration, although that is a legitimate problem and a legitimate concern. It was the control exercised over British economic growth by Brussels.
And finally, Peter, I just wanted to ask you, you spoke there about President Trump sort of pushing the agenda in Europe. Do you think that he has forced European leaders now to take Arctic security, frankly, much more seriously?
I hope he has. It's a concern. Submarines with destructive capability up around the polar ice cap need to be identified and monitored. They threaten London, Paris, Berlin, Oslo, Stockholm, Copenhagen, Ottawa, New York, Chicago, Detroit, Seattle, Tokyo, and depending on whose submarines they are, Moscow or Beijing. So yeah, I think the Arctic is a place where destabilization of the global regime could begin quickly, quietly, and lethally. So the idea that we're looking at it now more seriously, we're considering not just the resource, the potential resource exploitation, resource cultivation up there, but the security components is a net positive for global stability and global security.
Peter, it's always very fascinating to talk to you. We thank you very much indeed for your analysis.
Thank you very much. Good to be with you.
Okay, for more insight into this, I'm now joined by Steve Gill, an attorney and political analyst in Nashville, Tennessee. Mr. Gill, thank you very much indeed for joining us. From Washington's perspective then, just give us some background, some context to help our viewers understand this. What really changed to bring Greenland back into the forefront of the conversation?
I think, again, you have a more expansive view of this region, both North and South America, Central America, and kind of the Americas, which, at least geographically would include Greenland. And I think President Trump has a more expansive view of our area and geographic influence than I think some previous administrations have had. So I think Greenland has kind of been left off the list for a long time because it has not been seen as an adversary or a particular beneficial ally. And I think President Trump sees the world much differently, as we're seeing in South and Central America, the Caribbean, and now expanding into discussions about Greenland.
And Steve, we were talking with Peter there about the sense in which President Trump doesn't really want to invade or take ownership, that's really just the sort of dramatic language that he sort of allows to occur because it keeps people second guessing, that what he's really looking for is something along the lines of a partnership, something much more strategic. Is that also your view?
I think that's entirely accurate. And I think people need to remember is that you have to take what Trump says seriously, but not necessarily literally. And I think in this case, when he's talking about, for example, as Peter mentioned, military involvement, that's if Greenland is somehow becomes a target of some adversary in some way, not necessarily that President Trump is foreseeing boots on the ground to take Greenland by force. I think that he is a master of the art of the deal, and he starts at one point throwing out one offer, knowing that's not what's going to happen, but that somewhere between that and nothing is where the deal is going to end up. And he has a pretty good track record of making that happen, not only in business, but in international diplomacy and attempting to end some of the wars that have broken out throughout the world. I think, again, you constantly see him set one goal, recognizing that's the negotiation towards where he wants things to end up. And frankly, he's a master of that, and attention to areas of discussion that have been overlooked, such as Greenland.
And just talk us through some of that art of the deal, Steve, because he already has diplomatic relations with Denmark. He has military access to some degree through Denmark. Obviously, bilateral discussions, Denmark will be responsive to the enormous power that America has. Why make this so public? What role does that play in getting Trump an advantage, do you think?
I think that when you look at what's happening in Europe, and particularly with the flood of illegal immigrants that have poured throughout Europe, have, to a large extent, I think in the Trump view, destroyed their cultural identity, that you continues to change the identities of the French and British and German culture and populations. I don't think that President Trump thinks that there's a massive threat that tens of thousands of Somalis and Middle Easterners are going to flood into Greenland. But when you're looking at the problems that Denmark has, they're distracted by their own internal economic and cultural issues. And I think President Trump sees that if Denmark and Europe doesn't see Greenland as a priority in terms of kind of moving pieces on the chessboard with respect to China, which he recognizes as our primary adversary, militarily, economically, diplomatically, and Russia, which hopefully we can turn the tide and quit pushing Russia further into the arms of China, bring them back into more positive relations with the U.S. They're a natural ally for the development economically and politically and otherwise with Greenland. So I think he is, again, looking at a giant chessboard, and to the extent that anybody's ever watched the Star Trek series, he's playing three-dimensional chess, while some people around the world are still playing checkers.
Three-dimensional chess. Yeah, I mean, there's a lot going on domestically in the US, isn't there? We know how polarized things have become, like many other countries. Nevertheless, if you look at independents, undecided voters, moderates on both sides, how do they view this situation, do you think? Is it positively, in the sense this is sort of strategic realism, or is the criticism that this is too much political theatre?
I think President Trump is a realist. I mean, he's a business guy first. So he is a realist. So you use the term realism. I think that's exactly the right word to deal with Trump. And for example, when he looks at the EU, he sees it collapsing from within, where you have the French, the British, the Germans at odds with Hungary and with Italy and others in terms of both policy involving Ukraine, but also economic policies, the flood, again, of immigration into the countries. He sees it as being on thin ice, which is why he's proposed this idea of let's deal with the reality of the world economic powers. The G7 is not necessarily the real deal. It's China, it's Russia, it's Japan. That's the real core of kind of the C5 that he's talking about, which again underscores the realism of Trump's worldview that while there may be a great history of Britain being a dominant imperial power, that's not necessarily the reality of the world today. And the power of NATO as a defensive force being converted to somewhat of an offensive force is not what Trump supports either, particularly when U.S. taxpayers are funding, half of the total cost for a region of the world that they ought to be able to fund and defend themselves. So I think realism is the right word. And I think he has the same approach here in the U.S. When he looks at the progress that he's making economically here, I think he is confident that politically in the U.S., there are going to be strong winds behind him heading into our midterm elections as gas prices decline and energy prices come down, which not only helps the U.S., but globally. When you see food prices coming down, when you see the tax cuts built into his big, beautiful bill, they go into effect now. You have the Federal Reserve Chairman, Jerome Powell, who will be leaving power in May. That will lower interest rates, making housing more affordable, rents more affordable, car purchases and everything else that people finance more affordable. Their credit card bills will see less burdensome inflationary types of interest. So I think he sees that by mid-year this year, the economy in the U.S. will continue to improve, and Republicans will get the biggest benefit of that at the polls come August and November, when we start series and general election campaigns.
Yeah, it's very interesting, Steve. US productivity looking strong relative to Europe as well. Do you think there are those that suggest that President Trump kind of miscalculated somehow in terms of how upset European allies were going to be at all of this talk of Greenland. But do you think he really cares, the president? Doesn't it actually work to his advantage, because it sort of demonstrates to the world that he can disappoint world leaders with almost no consequence?
Well, and I think he looks at, again, let's use the term reality again, the political realities of, let's look at, and Trump is always a guy who loves to talk about poll numbers. Let's look at Starmer's poll numbers, Macron's poll numbers, Merz's poll numbers in Germany, and then let's compare those to the shift towards conservative populist politicians in places, like Meloni in Italy, but also you're seeing massive gains in other countries, the AfD in Germany, Nigel Farage and his crew in London. You're seeing a move in the Trumpish direction within the EU, and I think Trump pays very close attention to those poll numbers, and the leaders that are shouting and screaming and whining and complaining to him are the ones who are least effective and powerful in their own countries. And as you point out, their GDP, their economic growth is faltering. Even what Russia is experiencing with sanctions imposed on them. So I think President Trump doesn't necessarily really pay much attention to what these European Union leaders are saying, particularly when they have been, in his view, taking such advantage of the United States with the tariffs for so long, blocking our goods, our products, our farm products from their markets with exorbitant tariffs while enjoying big access to the U.S., and all we heard is that he's declaring a trade war. Well, we were at war. The U.S. just wasn't playing. So Trump comes in and says, no, we're wanting parity. We're wanting to equal things out. And the same people complaining to him about every other action he takes were the ones attacking and defending their high tariffs, who've now dropped them dramatically, including Canada, by the way, realizing that the oil flow from Venezuela may devastate the Canadian economy that's had extremely high tariffs on U.S. goods and products, and including farm products. Canada has had massive tariffs on American oranges and orange juice. And it's not like they're protecting the orange groves in Vancouver or Edmonton. They don't have them. So there were other plays at play to harm the U.S. economy. And I think Trump is not tolerating it, whether it's Canada, whether it's the European Union or anybody else.
Mr. Gill, pleasure as always to speak to you. Thank you very much for joining us from Nashville.
Thanks. Thank you, my friend.
After the break, we take a look at Greenland's strategic spotlight with analysis from Denmark on sovereignty and Arctic security inside NATO. Do stay with us.
Мною принято решение о проведении специальной военной операции.
These are our people that are dying every day because these missiles and drones are still able to fly.
Dual goods that are found in the battlefield.
The U.S. and other countries have sanctioned Vladimir Putin directly for the invasion.
Armenian trade with Russia has increased like 300-400% since 2022.
Росія у Вірменії використовує різні методи обходу санкцій.
Dual-use goods, which can be non-military goods like washing machines, can be then dismantled and they are used for military purposes inside Russia.
All these components were produced by the countries who provided the sanctions against the Russia.
So the trade is two ways: banned Western goods, which are sanctioned, going through Armenia, and Russian goods going out, like diamond, golds, and other expensive raw materials going out from Russia through Armenia to the West.
There is a reluctance on the side of the Western institutions to impose any sanctions on Armenia.
Inside Politics delves deeply into the heart of global issues shaping our world today. Join me for your go-to source of political analysis from across the region and beyond.
Welcome back to Primetime. Greenland has re-emerged as a strategic flashpoint after renewed US interest triggered firm responses from Europe. At the centre is Denmark's role, Greenland's autonomy, and what Arctic security really means inside NATO. Well, joining me now to discuss this from a different angle is Mette Nord-Klaushøj, an American politics specialist at the Danish financial newspaper Børsen. Mette, thank you very much indeed for joining us. Give us the perspective, please, then, from Denmark. Explain this sensitivity, because in one sense, there's a sort of obvious element to it, and we've seen the sort of social media exchanges between politicians. But just explain a bit more about what's going on underneath in terms of how Denmark perceives this US interest. I presume that it sees it as something that is deeply unsettling.
Well, I usually explain it as since the end of the Second World War, Denmark has seen US as kind of our big brother, the country that would guarantee our freedom, peace and prosperity, and come in and save us if the Soviets, then Russians now, were to want to take over. And all of a sudden it's like, no, the US is not a big brother who's on our side. The US is a bully who might actually take stuff from us. And that's unnerving to Danish politicians, especially people in Greenland, obviously, but to everybody around here.
And one of the main points that's been asserted by leaders in Denmark is this key point of principle that Greenland's future lies with its people. Just tell us more about that principle and perhaps explain how the relationship between Denmark and Greenland actually works in practice.
Well, I think we have to understand, first of all, Greenland physically is very far away from Denmark. Secondly, we have a colonial past in Greenland. We haven't always treated Greenlanders as good as we should have from Danish government side. But we also know that because it's such a tiny country population-wise, they pretty much wouldn't be able to do anything on their own. Like, they need to be part of a bigger whole. That's at least how we see it. Maybe seen as paternalistic, but in Denmark we secure, free universal health care, free universal education, all of that for Greenlanders, just like the rest of us who live back in mainland Denmark enjoy. At the same time, we want to respect the Greenlandish people's right to determine as much as possible of their own fate and their own future.
Now, we were talking with our previous guests, Mette, about the simple facts that there is a bilateral relationship, a good line of open communication between Washington and Copenhagen. At any time, President Trump could exert enormous pressure given the power that the US has. He already has access to some degree through Denmark's NATO membership. So why, in your view, is this being played out so publicly and so dramatically?
I think that's part of why this situation is so unnerving for us, is that we just don't understand it. Since, again, the end of the Second World War, throughout the Cold War and now, Denmark has made pretty clear to, successive US governments that they could do as much as they felt they needed to do, wanted to do in Greenland. We have almost given them completely free rein to have military installations and all of that. And of course, we would continue to do that. And we've made very clear, our leaders have, that we would continue to let the US use Greenland in terms of for foreign, security, whatever. So it's befuddling to us, since we've always had this open stance, sometimes to the detriment of Danish governments, where it's been unpopular in the population at large. So they've just let the US come in and pretty much do what they wanted to do. It's befuddling why the US all of a sudden says, not good enough, we want to own the thing.
What's the analysis of people in Denmark to this? The people you meet, your readers, what do they think? What's their reaction to what's going on?
First of all, it makes people feel unsettled. I mean, if you think about it, it's been more than 75 years, 80 years since the end of World War II. Everybody in Denmark has lived in a country of peace and prosperity. Those who were very small children during the Second World War are now close to the end of their lifespans. By far, most of us have only ever known peace and security, and that peace and security, whether Danes have known it or not, has to the largest extent been founded on that guarantee by the US that they would come to our rescue if anything happened from the east, i.e. from the Soviet Union or now Russia. And it's kind of shaken our fundamental sense of safety and security to our core. And so Danes are worried. I would say some people are almost terrified, mostly because it's like the whole foundation of our society seems to be shaking, rumbling underneath our feet.
And you spoke before very candidly about the colonial past between Denmark and Greenland. The current situation is a very long way from that, isn't it? There are a huge amount of autonomy within the governance of Greenland. There are only a few things, I think, that fall outside that defence, being one of them. Do you think whatever happens with this situation, that in a sense it sort of brings the topic of Greenland's independence more into the spotlight?
I wouldn't say so. I would think that over time, assuming the president of the U.S. doesn't actually take any steps to annex Greenland, I would assume that this will actually make most people in Greenland feel closer to Denmark because, yes, they have a wide degree of autonomy. They are also such a small population, like 50,000, a little more, a little less, depending. Some of them are Danes living there. And they wouldn't be able to have an army, all of those things. So they are like a self-governing territory, and they get funds, as I said, for universal healthcare, education, things they can't expect to be getting if the U.S. annexes Greenland, since those things aren't the rights of American citizens. So I think as Greenlanders in general will feel closer connected to Denmark once this hopefully blows over.
Let's say it's been really informative to speak to you. Thank you very much indeed for your analysis.
You're very welcome.
After the break, we take a look at the top business news stories of the day with Katie Wilson. Do stay with us. On World Business, we meet the boardroom leaders making market-moving decisions. And find out how leaders are dealing with continuous technological disruption.
Принято решение о проведении специальной военной операции.
These are our people that are dying every day because these missiles and drones are still able to fly.
Dual goods that are found in the battlefield.
The U.S. and other countries have sanctioned Vladimir Putin directly for the invasion.
Armenian trade with Russia has increased like 300-400% since 2022.
Росія у Вірменії використовує різні методи обходу санкцій.
Dual-use goods, which can be non-military goods like washing machines, can be then dismantled and they are used for military purposes inside Russia.
All these components were produced by the countries who provided the sanctions against Russia.
So the trade is two ways: banned Western goods, which are sanctioned, going through Armenia, and Russian goods going out, like diamond, golds, and other expensive raw materials going out from Russia through Armenia to the West.
There is a reluctance on the side of the Western institutions to impose any sanctions on Armenia.
Politics delves deeply into the heart of global issues shaping our world today. Join me for your go-to source of political analysis from across the region and beyond.
Welcome to A News, unfiltered news and analysis from the region and beyond. From Washington to Beijing, Tehran to Kabul, to Tbilisi to Tashkent.
Hello, I'm Jay. That's challenging.
Today is the third.
We're with you 24/7, taking you live to the front lines of the day's biggest stories.
Welcome to Gabala. Hi, Candy. One important note.
To Fierce.
I'm here. Azerbaijan and Armenia.
Hello, we are recording on the 8th of November.
Reporting from Paris,
Dar es Salaam, Tel Aviv,
Washington,
London,
Moscow,
Kyiv, Berlin,
Rio de Janeiro, Beijing, Bangkok, Tbilisi, Tashkent, Almaty, Kazakhstan, Port Sudan, Tehran, Islamabad, Istanbul,
Kabul for A News.
Welcome back. You're watching Prime Time, and Katie Wilson has joined us. She's got the latest business news stories for us. Katie, what is on the agenda tonight?
Well, Guy, the US selling chips to China isn't going as smoothly as planned. We'll have more on that, as well as the latest from the CES in Las Vegas. Let's get started. First this evening, US chip giant Nvidia is asking Chinese buyers to pay in full upfront for its coveted H200 AI chips. It comes as uncertainty swirls around Beijing's approval process. Let's take a look in more detail.
Nvidia is reportedly requiring full upfront payment from Chinese customers seeking its H200 AI chips. Two sources told Reuters it's due to ongoing uncertainty over Beijing's approval of the shipments. They said the US chipmaker has imposed unusually strict terms, including full payment for orders with no options to cancel, ask for refunds or change configurations after placement. Nvidia and China's industry ministry have yet to respond to requests for comment. Last month, Reuters reported Chinese tech firms have placed orders for more than 2 million H200 chips, priced at around $27,000 each. That exceeds Nvidia's inventory of 700,000 of the chips. While Chinese chip makers have developed AI processors, their performance still lags behind Nvidia's H200 for large-scale training of advanced AI models. Bloomberg reported Thursday that China plans to approve some H200 imports as soon as this quarter. The report said Chinese officials are preparing to allow purchases for select commercial uses, but will ban purchases by the military, sensitive government agencies, critical infrastructure, and state-owned enterprises due to security concerns.
Staying on chip technology, while Nvidia tightens rules in China, Samsung is cashing in on the AI boom. The South Korean giant says soaring demand and tight supply has helped drive a threefold jump in quarterly operating profit, hitting a record high.
Samsung Electronics on Thursday projected that profits would see a threefold jump to record highs over the latest quarter. That is, as tight supply and a surge in artificial intelligence-driven demand stoked prices for memory chips. Samsung estimated an operating profit of almost $14 billion for the October to December period. The numbers beat analyst estimates and highlight how chip prices have rocketed as chip makers scramble to keep up with demand. Samsung is the world's largest memory chip maker. the global DRAM market is expected to more than double to $311 billion in 2026 from last year, according to a forecast by Macquarie Equity Research. Such chips are used in servers, computers, and smartphones to temporarily store data and help run programs and applications smoothly and swiftly. Analysts remain optimistic about Samsung's earnings outlook, expecting memory undersupply to persist into 2026 as global data center investment expands and capacity remains constrained. They also expect the firm to make gains in sales of advanced chips to customers, including AI champion NVIDIA. However, some have cautioned that rising memory component prices could dampen demand. Samsung shares closed down by 1.6% Thursday as investors took their profits following a year of strong gains.
From chips to clothes now, and another company is beating expectations. Japanese brand Uniqlo said profits jumped and its outlook is getting brighter, helped by strong global sales and solid demand in China, even as US tariffs bite.
Fast Retailing raised its yearly outlook on Thursday. That after the Uniqlo operator reported operating profit easily beat analyst expectations. Profits surged by a third during the September to November period to $1.3 billion, with revenue up 15%. The Japanese fashion giant further said strong global sales growth helped it deal with US tariffs. It saw a pickup in sales in its largest overseas market of China, and pursued an aggressive expansion strategy in North America and Europe. Profit from its domestic business grew just upward of a fifth from a year earlier. Many overseas markets also saw double-digit growth in revenue and profit. Autumn sales in China were strong, and the launch of a collaborative business with e-commerce giant JD.com brought in new customers. Fast Retailing's international segment posted profit growth of just over 41% overall. Looking ahead, Fast Retailing has raised its operating profit target to $4.14 billion, up from a previous $3.8 billion.
But not every retailer is riding high. Saks Global Enterprises is reportedly eyeing a $1 billion loan as it braces for a possible bankruptcy. Experts say it will need a true retail insider to steer the brand back on track.
A luxury retailer could end up in bankruptcy court soon. Saks Global Enterprises, which includes Saks Fifth Avenue, Neiman Marcus, and others, is in talks to secure a loan of about $1 billion as it prepares for a possible Chapter 11 bankruptcy filing in the coming weeks. That's according to a Bloomberg News report citing people familiar with the matter. Saks Global did not immediately respond to a request for comment. Reuters could not immediately verify the report.
Hopefully, if it does go into bankruptcy, they don't simply cut their way to profitability.
Mary Eppner, adjunct professor at the Fashion Institute of Technology in New York, says Saks will need a leader who is enmeshed in the apparel world to help fix its problems. Saks recently hired Richard Baker, who has a background in real estate and finance, to run the company. But Eppner says he may only be a good short-term solution.
Even as recently as December, it's my understanding that vendors were issuing RTVs, which are returns to vendor. It means that they wanted their product back because they were in fear of not getting paid. So he faces a lot of issues. So you need somebody in there who is a true merchant and somebody who can repair these relationships.
Eppner added that competitors have swooped in to take advantage of a struggling Saks.
Many of these luxury brands have opted to sell to other retailers that they haven't in the past, namely Bloomingdale's, Nordstrom, and Macy's. And it's rather shocking. And so Saks has lost a lot of their momentum with those brands, and that needs to be repaired and improved.
The Wall Street Journal earlier reported that Saks Global was preparing for bankruptcy after missing an interest payment exceeding $100 million on debt from its Neiman merger.
Over to the Consumer Electronics Show in Las Vegas, and a driverless future is rolling in at full speed. Uber, Lucid and Nuro pulled the wraps off their new robo-taxi, part electric SUV, part AI experiment. It's the latest entry in the race to put self-driving cars on city streets.
A new robo-taxi design was unveiled at this year's Consumer Electronics Show in Las Vegas. It's the product of a partnership between Uber, EV maker Lucid, and autonomous vehicle technology firm Neuro. And it joins the growing list of US contenders from companies including Waymo and Tesla. The vehicle is built on Lucid's Gravity electric SUV. It has a roof-mounted sensor ring with cameras, LiDAR, and radar for full 360-degree coverage. Uber created the inside experience with touchscreens that let passengers adjust the temperature, seats, and entertainment. The robotaxi uses NVIDIA's AI driving hardware and is driven by Neuro's autonomous tech, meaning it can drive itself in certain conditions without a human. On-road testing began in December, using engineering prototypes with a safety operator. David Salguero is Neuro's head of communications.
We use an AI autonomy foundation model that basically learns as it goes along. So as we're driving, as we're testing, both on-road and in simulations, it gets better and better at driving. So that means we can really quickly deploy it into new places, put it on new types of vehicles for logistics or for robotaxis, or even maybe someday for personally owned vehicles.
For Lucid, the robotaxi offers growth beyond regular electric cars for consumers. The company has been battling slower EV demand and mounting competition. It recently reported 2025 deliveries slightly above estimates, but production was much higher than sales. Lucid CEO Mark Winterhoff says the plan is to tap new markets.
Before we were focusing on B2C customers, the regular cars for you and me, and which we still do, obviously. But now with that cooperation with Uber and others to come, we now open the robotaxi market for us. So it's more like expanding the application of our EV technology, which has been proven in the last couple of years to be industry leading. And with that cooperation, now we have another market to serve.
The partnership planned to launch robotaxi services in the San Francisco Bay Area later this year.
And finally, it wouldn't be an electronics show without some wacky inventions. At this year's CES, music fans weren't plugging in headphones, they were eating them. A new lollipop uses bone conduction technology to turn your mouth into a music player. Would you give it a try? Let's take a look.
Lollipop has a flavor.
Lollipop Star is a lollipop that embedded a music in there. It's not only a lollipop, it's a carrier of the music. It utilizes a bone conduction technology. While you eat lollipop, and you're able to listen the music in there through the bone conduction technology.
Put it in your mouth and close your ears, where you can actually hear music. I'm like, no way, no. I'm like, it is music. So I can see my great nephews and nieces actually getting involved in something like this. And it was like, here I am, 66 years old, and enjoying something like this. It's amazing, bro. It's amazing.
There you have it, musical lollipops. That's your business news roundup for the day. Back to you, Guy. Would you give those a try?
I think I'd give them a try. I'm not sure what I'd look like trying them, Katie. Isn't that amazing though? We've gone from technology we can wear to technology now that we can eat. Amazing, mind-boggling stuff. Katie, thank you very much indeed. Okay, after the break, we'll take a look at a major milestone in Azerbaijan's green transition as a 240 megawatt wind power project is officially inaugurated. Do stay with us.
Inside Politics delves deeply into the heart of global issues shaping our world today. Join me for your go-to source of political analysis from across the region and beyond.
Мною принято решение о проведении специальной военной операции.
These are our people that are dying every day because these missiles and drones are still able to fly.
Dual goods that are found in the battlefield.
The U.S. and other countries have sanctioned Vladimir Putin directly for the invasion.
Armenian trade with Russia has increased like 300-400% since 2022.
Росія у Вірменії використовує різні методи обходу санкцій.
Dual-use goods, which can be non-military goods like washing machines, can be then dismantled and they are used for military purposes inside Russia.
All these components were produced by the countries who provided the sanctions against Russia.
So the trade is two ways: banned Western goods, which are sanctioned, going through Armenia, and Russian goods going out, like diamond, golds, and other expensive raw materials going out from Russia through Armenia to the West.
There is a reluctance on the side of the Western institutions to impose any sanctions on Armenia.
On World Business, we meet the boardroom leaders making market-moving decisions. And find out how leaders are dealing with continuous technological disruption.
Shaken to its very foundation.
Welcome to A-News, unfiltered news and analysis from the region and beyond. From Washington to Beijing, Tehran to Kabul, to Tbilisi to Tashkent. Hello, I'm Jay. That's challenging.
Today is the third.
We're with you 24/7, taking you live to the front lines of the day's biggest stories. Welcome to Gabala. One important note to this. I'm here.
Azerbaijan and Armenia.
Hello, we are reporting on the 8th of November.
Reporting from Paris,
Dar es Salaam, Tel Aviv,
Washington,
London,
Moscow,
Kyiv, Berlin,
Rio de Janeiro, Beijing, Bangkok, Tbilisi, Tashkent, Almaty, Kazakhstan, Port Sudan, Tehran, Islamabad, Istanbul,
Kabul, for A-News.
Welcome back to PrimeTime. Now, a major step in Azerbaijan's renewable energy strategy is taking place today. The official inauguration of the Huzur Absheron 240 megawatt wind power plant marks a key milestone in the country's green energy development. Fikret Dulakanov reports now from the ground.
first official event at Gülistan Palace of 2026 is set to focus on Azerbaijan's green energy ambitions. Very shortly, the country will formally launch the Khiza offshore wind power plant, the largest wind energy project ever implemented in Azerbaijan. The event will take place here at Gülistan Palace with the participation of the President of Azerbaijan, Ilham Aliyev, and the representatives of Saudi Arabia's Aqua Power, led by the chairman of the board of directors, Mohammad Abdullah Abu Nahyan. The wind power plant has a total installed capacity of 240 megawatts and is expected to become fully operational this year. Once online, it will generate close to 1 billion kilowatt hours of electricity annually, making a significant contribution to the national grid. According to official estimates, the project will allow Azerbaijan to save around 220 million cubic meters of natural gas each year, reduce carbon emissions by more than 400,000 tons, and supply electricity to approximately 300,000 households. The plan is being developed across areas in Khiza and Absheron, with turbine installation starting in Absheron, where the first 8 units have already been planned. The total investment exceeds $300 million and is fully financed through foreign investment. Importantly, this is Aqua Power's first renewable energy project in Azerbaijan, underlining the country's growing role as a regional hub for clean and diversified energy.
Well, joining me now in the studio is Anastasia Lavrina. Anastasia, great to see you as always. This is obviously a big energy business deal in its own right, but how is it being positioned politically? Because potentially there's more to it than that, isn't there?
Well, indeed, as our colleague speaker just mentioned, this is just the beginning of a long and successful cooperation. I'm more than sure it will be successful, as today it was also highlighted by the President Ilham Aliyev and by the participants. This is just the beginning, and Azerbaijan already proved to be a reliable energy partner for Europe, and now we are increasing our presence through the cooperation with the Gulf states. And the President himself mentioned that Azerbaijan is open for foreign investments, and there is a right environment here in the country for foreign investors to invest, to see the potential, and to work closely with the government and private partners. There was also the ambassador of China participating at this event, and she also stressed the developing potential for the bilateral cooperation, especially in the renewable sphere, as China can be as a potential investor, as a country that also can share the innovations it has with Azerbaijan and its, let's say, the people, the professionals who are working here, to exchange the knowledge to make sure that Azerbaijan invest and develop even more. So I would say that in President Aliyev's remarks today, the plant was positioned as part of 3 larger narratives. The first is Azerbaijan's green transition. Well, it's free up more natural gas for exports, especially for Europe. More renewables we can use it for domestic purpose, and more gas, meaning will be exported to Europe to cover Europe's needs. The second narrative is that countries evolving energy diplomacy, like international investment partnership with Saudi Arabia, with China, with other countries who will be willing to become a partner with Azerbaijan. And the third one is post-COP29 identity Azerbaijan is building for itself. So Azerbaijan is moving from the achievements and agreements which were achieved here during COP29 in 2024 to the practical solutions, state capable of combining hydrocarbons, then climate diplomacy and infrastructure, modernizations, and everything is to be concentrated in Azerbaijan as a real potential renewable hub here in the region, which is important for Gulf states, for Central Asia, for Europe, even for the United States, despite the fact that Donald Trump is more fossil fuels oriented leader, but still renewables, it's on the agenda. So in sum, I can say that the project is being framed politically as energy, diplomacy, climate leadership, and export leverage within this huge Azerbaijani diplomacy, rather than as a separate element of a global politics.
Yeah, you mentioned the Gulf countries there, senior representatives from the Kingdom of Saudi Arabia present. It sends a signal, doesn't it, to the rest of the world about Azerbaijan's intentions in terms of partnering with that part of the world.
Yes, indeed. And just before I came to the studio, I watched the short promo announcement. The executive director of A News, Rifat Hamzayev, had the chance to sit and speak and ask the tough questions about the potential Azerbaijan has. And of course, it was responded that Azerbaijan has a good investment environment, meaning that investors are willing to invest to Azerbaijan, feeling probably security, stability, potential developments for the future. Then also Azerbaijan is positioned, as I already said, as a hub in the region. Yes, it already has an experience being a hub from the logistical point of view, from the energy point of view, and now renewables. Then Azerbaijan for the future can also export. Actually, there is a potential and already projects on the agenda with European states to become a potential export of renewables, electricity from the region to Europe. And then other countries like China, for example, or Central Asia can also join the project. Then why not? Why it shouldn't be interested for the Gulf states like Saudi Arabia, which is also being considered as a very important player in a global energy market, meaning that Saudi participation here helps Azerbaijan project this moment, probably also to attract more investments from other countries. Following the example, Saudi Arabia showing to other potential investments, more and more countries will be deciding to invest into Azerbaijan. And once again, Saudi Arabia sees Azerbaijan as a fast-growing regional energy hub. And this is a very, very good advice and recommendation for us partners and investors to come in and work with Azerbaijan.
Yeah, you mentioned that Rifat Hamzayev interview that will be coming soon for A News viewers. I think that will be particularly fascinating to understand the perspective from very senior figure on the Saudi side of things. So viewers can look forward to that coming very, very soon on A News. And you mentioned there the region as well. How does this, do you think, position the role of Azerbaijan in the region when it comes to energy? It's a conduit, it's a partner. How do you see the role of the country going forward?
Oh, here I can mention, I can describe the situation from different angles. First, Azerbaijan can be positioned also as an independent player. Why? Because it can cover all the needs of its own population when it comes to the needs in electricity, fossil fuels, and now its renewables. Then Azerbaijan can be, again, fairly positioned as a good and reliable partner for Europe, Central Asia, Turkey, and Georgia. Even before the resolution of a conflict with Armenia, Azerbaijan already started to cooperate with Turkey and Georgia. And even those countries in Europe who were against the Southern Gas Corridor, probably in the 2016, 2018, because probably they couldn't understand the real potential of that because of the cooperation with other partners they had, like Russia, for example. Then after, so many countries praised Azerbaijan's position and thanked Azerbaijani President Ilham Aliyev for keeping up, for continuing working on this project, making sure that Southern Gas Corridor is working. And I do remember that time United States of America also helped Azerbaijan a lot, supporting this project from all different perspectives. Then we can mention Italy, Bulgaria, and some other countries who are now thankful to Azerbaijan, who became a real, I would say, the safer, the closest partner for many countries since the start of the war between Russia and Ukraine. It was Azerbaijan who supported those countries. So now when Europe is moving back to the importance of fossil fuels development policy from only renewables, as it was probably a couple of years ago, yes, Azerbaijan can also show additional potential for those countries. Also, probably in the beginning, Azerbaijan needs some more support from outside, from the experienced countries who are involved in these renewables issues since a long time before. But again, Azerbaijan since some time already can position itself as an expert, having experts working on the ground, grabbing the international experience. And as I already said, Saudi Arabia, it's a real good partner for us. China, Saudi Arabia, maybe again United States and Europe, the countries who are willing to work with Azerbaijan with this potential. And another very important moment I want to highlight here, since the end of the war in 2020, Azerbaijan started to rebuild Karabakh and East Zangezur, investing a lot. In the beginning, it was only Azerbaijan and some other countries in the region who supported us, let's say Central Asian states, Turkey, of course. Now there are more countries who are willing to cooperate with us, but at that time, Azerbaijan started to rebuild. They were all destroyed, a lot of destructions. And it was not only the policy of rebuilding, it was the policy of investment in innovations. Let's say green cities, smart cities in Agdam and etc. So Azerbaijan showed that even that time we were able to invest more to do it in accordance with the highest standards, in accordance with the requirements, and standards United Nations Sustainable Development Goals. So now Karabakh and East Zangezur has also a huge potential to be considered as a place for the future development of renewable policy of Azerbaijan, to where investors can invest and get more profits for themselves. Then the Caspian region itself, the Caspian Sea, the potential of the region, which Azerbaijan can also share with other investors and partners. So there are a lot of possibilities: the wind, the sun, the geographical position, the important position of Azerbaijan on the edge of between, on the crossroads of east and west and north and south. All of these together can create a huge potential and real profitable environment for those countries who are willing to work with Azerbaijan.
Okay, so a big deal economically, a big deal geopolitically. The ceremony, of course, though, now is over. What are the practical next steps?
Adding to what you just said, and security. This is also very important, because if country cannot guarantee security, investors will have some fear to invest. But here Azerbaijan is showing that from the security point of view, we are stable, and we also can, let's say, create the appropriate conditions for those who are working with us. So I guess the government is clearly also preparing for a multi-project build out in renewables, particularly in wind. As I said already, in the Caspian Sea, in the liberated lands, in Karabakh and East Zangezur, there is a huge potential. As it was also mentioned at the opening ceremony today, it's just the beginning. So for the future, probably Saudi Arabia, China, and some more countries will be willing to work with Azerbaijan. And this is just the first project for Saudi Arabia. It was also highlighted. So having a successful result within just a short period of time, if I'm not mistaken, the start was given in 2022. So it's like slightly more than 3 years. So yes, indeed, it can attract more, let's say, it can bring more possibilities for cooperation with Saudi Arabia in the near future. The post-opening message is that it's entry ticket to renewable phase, where Azerbaijan aims to become a producer, exporter, investment hub. And this is not just a transitional gas supplier. Azerbaijan already has a status, transitional gas supplier to the, just recently, President Ilham Aliyev in the interview with a local TV channel stated that Azerbaijan is the only country in the world who is exporting the gas to so many countries at the same time. It's 14 countries at the moment, and 2 more to be added in 2026. So we are traditional gas supplier, but now we have also potential to become, probably in some future, traditional exporter of renewables, and first of all, producer of renewables. And what is also good, I guess, for the investors, it's not only investors who have to invest, it's also Azerbaijan who is sharing some investments, creating the opportunities and providing the security from all perspectives. And we can openly state about that. From all perspectives, investors can be proud to work in these particular geographical locations, having more benefits and securing the potential for the future.
So, as you put it, the entry ticket to large-scale renewable exports has been won. What do you see then in the future? Will there be more large-scale wind projects? Will there be greater partnerships with countries like China? What is this future vision that this ticket buys the country access to?
Yes, I also like this phrase, entry ticket. Of course, more cooperation, more potential. Remember a couple of days ago, we were speaking that Azerbaijan, it's not saying that we can do it. It's practically doing something and then proving it with the facts and consequences. So here we see the result. This is not just the beginning. Renewables, it's a new sphere for everyone on the planet. This is a new direction the countries have to invest and cooperate. And Azerbaijan already started, and it was a successful start. Not alone, but also in partnership with the global actors like Saudi Arabia, like China. And let's say, just imagine when the representative of such a big countries are coming together and explaining the potential Azerbaijan has for the future. Even, let's say, China's position with the Belt and Road Initiative and the Middle Corridor as a part of this huge project. Even this project can become a future line and an important sphere of cooperation between two governments together with the Central Asian states on the sphere of renewables, where China has a huge potential for the future to be developed, but China also needs the ways to export this. Therefore, I do really see there is a big potential for Azerbaijan to continue working in this sphere and being a reliable partner of the United Nations, contributing a lot since the time of COVID, when Azerbaijan initiated many programs and even the special meetings, which a lot of initiatives were brought out by the President Ilham Aliyev. So I guess United Nations here should also highlight and appreciate Azerbaijan's contribution to the sphere of renewables, climate change, environmental protections, which will be a potential consequence after the successful implementations of new renewables projects by Azerbaijan and by other countries in the region.
Very exciting. Anastasia, we thank you as always.
Thank you very much. Thank you.
Okay, after the break, we take a look at renewed diplomatic efforts on Ukraine as US and Ukrainian teams hold fresh talks, and President Zelensky seeks backing from European partners. Do stay with us. On World Business, we meet the boardroom leaders making market-moving decisions. And find out how leaders are dealing with continuous technological disruption.
Принято решение о проведении специальной военной операции.
These are our people that are dying every day because these missiles and drones are still able to fly.
Dual goods that are found in the battlefield.
The U.S. and other countries have sanctioned Vladimir Putin directly for the invasion.
Armenian trade with Russia has increased like 300-400% since 2022.
Росія у Вірменії використовує різні методи обходу санкцій.
Dual-use goods, which can be non-military goods like washing machines, can be then dismantled and they are used for military purposes inside Russia.
All these components were produced by the countries who provided the sanctions against Russia.
So the trade is two ways: banned Western goods, which are sanctioned, going through Armenia, and Russian goods going out, like diamond, golds, and other expensive raw materials going out from Russia through Armenia to the West.
There is a reluctance on the side of the Western institutions to impose any sanctions on Armenia.
Inside Politics delves deeply into the heart of global issues shaping our world today. Join me for your go-to source of political analysis from across the region and beyond.
Unfiltered news and analysis from the region and beyond. From Washington to Beijing, Tehran to Kabul, to Tbilisi to Tashkent.
Hello, I'm Jay. That's challenges.
Today is the third.
We're with you 24/7, taking you live to the front lines of the day's biggest stories.
Welcome to Gabala.
One important note to this.
I'm here.
Azerbaijan and Armenia.
Hello, we are reporting on the 8th of November.
Reporting from Paris,
Dar es Salaam, Tel Aviv,
Washington,
London,
Moscow,
Kyiv, Berlin,
Rio de Janeiro, Beijing, Bangkok, Tbilisi, Tashkent, Almaty, Kazakhstan, Port Sudan, Tehran, Islamabad, Istanbul,
Kabul, Port
Welcome back to Primetime. Diplomatic efforts to end the war in Ukraine are continuing. Ukrainian and US delegations met again on Wednesday for a third round of talks. Zelensky also called for support from his Cyprus visit.
The Ukrainian and US delegations held another round of consultations in Paris on Wednesday to discuss ways to end the conflict between Ukraine and Russia. It was the third meeting in 2 days between Ukrainian and US representatives in the French capital. During the talks, Ukraine's chief negotiator Rustem Umerov met with US envoy Steve Witkoff and President Donald Trump's son-in-law Jared Kushner. The discussions focused on key issues forming the basic framework for ending the war, including possible formats for future engagement between the leaders of Ukraine, European partners, and the United States. Meanwhile, Ukrainian President Volodymyr Zelensky also addressed Western allies during a visit to Cyprus on Wednesday. He called on Kyiv's partners to increase pressure on Russia through stronger sanctions. Zelensky said no additional demands should be placed on Ukraine in the latest round of peace talks.
We need a practical mechanism that will allow these funds to truly help Ukraine. This mechanism must be designed not to create problems, of course, but to reduce the challenges we already face. And we are doing everything required on our side in the negotiation process. And we expect that no additional or excessive demands will be placed on Ukraine.
Zelensky also called for progress on EU membership talks and tougher sanctions on Moscow, calling on Cyprus to move membership negotiations forward during its EU presidency.
Okay, joining me now in the studio is A News' Andy Mioch to help break down what all this means. Andy, welcome, good to see you. Just bring us up to speed then. What stood out for you from this latest round of talks in Paris?
Well, Guy, I would love to tell you that there has been some sort of an amazing breakthrough, but what we've heard today from Ukraine's President Volodymyr Zelensky is that Washington and Kyiv have essentially made a ready document on those bilateral security guarantees, and all that's now left is for him to finalize it with U.S. President Donald Trump. He said that yesterday's meetings of both countries' representatives focused on complex issues. Those are those toughest 10% issues, the Zaporizhzhia nuclear power plant and who gets to control territories in the east of Ukraine. Going into the latest round of US-Ukraine talks, we knew that those were the last remaining questions. Zelensky's new chief of staff and Ukraine's former spy chief, Kirill Budanov, said there were already concrete results, adding that not all information is to be made public. those talks followed Tuesday's meeting of the Coalition of the Willing that we spoke of extensively here at A News, where some 30 Western countries, EU, NATO met to provide some security guarantees for Ukraine post-ceasefire. We've even seen London and Paris confirming they would deploy troops on the ground after a ceasefire was in place to deter any possible future Russian invasion, even though things seem to be moving along. There was even a paper being signed by Emmanuel Macron, Keir Starmer, Volodymyr Zelensky. We've heard today from the Russians. They underlined their previous stance that any troops sent to Ukraine by Western governments would be deemed legitimate combat targets, adding that such, quote, militaristic declarations are becoming increasingly dangerous.
Andy, can we talk meetings for a moment? Because we were looking on the show yesterday about the coalition of the willing, the so-called coalition of the willing meetings. Now, if you just look at the highest level meetings, there have been 12 since March 2025. And whenever we see the press conferences afterwards, the leaders, particularly the European leaders, they seem quite pleased with themselves and with what's been achieved. We've heard of all sorts of documents being created, many hours now of these meetings. That's excluding the sort of obvious spin-off planning meetings that have clearly taken place. It's clear that they believe they're making a difference. Are they, though, really? I mean, if none of these meetings had ever taken place, would we be in any different a position now?
Now that you speak of those meetings, every time they come out at a press conference, say, yeah, we have achieved progress, we've made some certain steps and everything. I just imagine a person living in Donbass or living in Kiev and what that press conference and those heartfelt comments mean to them. Just to paraphrase, or I can even quote Trump after he met Putin last year. They had a summit in Alaska, and he said there's not a deal until there's a deal. The war has been raging for almost 4 years now. We're just a month shy, a month and a little bit from 4 years. Just yesterday, Russian strikes knocked out the power almost completely in Ukraine's southeastern Dnipropetrovsk and Zaporizhia regions. Ukraine says that around 1 million people are currently without electricity or heat, and the winters in Eastern Europe, they can be harsh with some temperatures, -10, -20. We don't know the exact forecast. Nonetheless, we have seen that this negotiating process has been reinvigorated in the past few months. When you look back to that original 28-point peace plan that Americans made with the Russians, and then that became a 20-point peace plan when Americans consulted the Ukrainians. Obviously, after brokering the Gaza ceasefire, which is still broadly holding, Washington turned their attention to other parts of the world, including Ukraine. But that also shifted. Just recently, we had the U.S. toppling and seizing Venezuela's president. We've had Donald Trump reiterating his previous threats of taking over Denmark's Greenland. That's one of the things Europeans have on their minds right now. He also issued warnings to Colombia, Mexico, Iran, and so on. So there's a lot of moving pieces globally. This is a fast developing situation. Let's just wait to see what Moscow says. What's their feedback on the latest document Kyiv and Washington have agreed?
Okay, let's look at President Zelensky then. He used his Cyprus visit to outline Ukraine's position. How did that go down with European leaders?
Well, as we've seen in the package, his key message was to not place new and excessive demands on Ukraine in order for this war to end. He was there for the official ceremony of Cyprus taking over the 6-month EU presidency. He met with Cyprus's president, European Commission Chief Ursula von der Leyen, European Council President Antonio Costa. He was pushing for more sanctions on Russia, and of course to accelerate the EU accession process for Ukraine. For some of the more recent European messaging we've heard the German Chancellor Friedrich Merz saying today that Europe must raise the price of war in Ukraine so that Russia would come to the table and accept a ceasefire. He said that a ceasefire is currently not on the agenda, but just because Russia doesn't want it to be. A bit earlier, we've heard from the Finnish Foreign Minister and OSCE Chief Elina Valtonen. She said that a Russian threat targeting the entire continent in a hybrid manner is something that's not going to go away in the foreseeable future. And she added that Russia only understands strength. When it comes to those messages, we've heard two strong messages today also from the French President Emmanuel Macron and the German President Frank-Walter Steinmeier, who, truth be told, his position is a bit more ceremonial, doesn't wield that much power. But they all concerned U.S. foreign policy. Macron was saying that Trump is turning away from its allies. Steinmeier was referencing recent events across the globe and saying that the international community might be transforming it into a den of robbers. Now, how much of a picture does that paint about the current situation and these negotiations as well? That's for everyone to say for themselves.
And Andy, we've heard calls for stronger sanctions. We've heard calls, as you mentioned, to accelerate EU accession for Ukraine. To some degree, are those discussions now taking place in parallel to peace discussions, almost becoming slightly separate?
It kind of comes and goes, you know. Sometimes it goes parallel, sometimes they intersect. But currently on those sanctions, there might be a major development. Republican Senator Lindsey Graham said that Donald Trump gave the green light to Republicans in the Senate to push forward the bill on those so-called secondary sanctions on countries that buy Russian energy. He said, citing the biggest clients for Russian energy, he said China, India, Brazil. And he said, quote, "This bill will allow President Trump to punish those countries who buy cheap Russian oil, fueling Putin's war machine." He said he hopes that this bill, which has been in the works for months now, will be voted on early next week. That announcement came the same day when U.S. seized a Russian-flagged oil tanker, one of the two they seized yesterday in the North Atlantic after a weeks-long pursuit. Now, when it comes to Ukraine's EU membership, the country applied for membership just days after the start of Russia's full-scale invasion. Some European powers had an idea to fast-track that accession process, but Hungary blocked it. So Kyiv and Brussels came up with a plan back in December that Ukraine should push through with the reforms to make it eligible to become a member of the EU. Brussels is going to check up on those, criteria, progress, and everything. Regardless of Budapest's veto on the opening of the formal negotiations, Hungary's backing will be required in the final stage. As you know, a country can become a member of the European Union if all the countries that are already members do not agree with that. One of the peace plan drafts, that 20-point peace plan that we spoke about earlier, when Zelensky was detailing that plan that contained a clause stating that Ukraine would join the European Union from January 1st of 2027. However, how realistic that is another thing, given the merit-based approach Brussels uses when it comes to accepting new members and their path. You know, you gotta take all the legal reforms, the acquis communautaire. The accession process is quite complex, and in many cases very long. I mean, just ask the Western Balkans countries.
Do you think it's too cynical, Andy, to suggest that the EU knows now that it cannot affect peace? So in a sense, it needs to create activity whilst it's waiting for peace to happen?
Well, you know, this is their backyard. And America has been bearing the brunt of this Russian invasion on Ukraine. Even with the previous administration in the United States, they have delivered arms, they have delivered funds, they have put their weight behind Ukraine in all of these talks and negotiations. Europeans, of course, have funded even more than the Americans, but their significance has somehow faltered. You know, during these past few months, where the U.S. just came in, called Russia and said, let's end this war, and Europe has been a bit sidelined here. So that accession might even be a way for them to get back there, to get a footing on the ground in Ukraine.
Very interesting indeed. Andy, as always, we thank you very much for covering the story. Thank you very much. Okay, do join us. We'll take a short break now and we'll be back with more very soon. Do stay with us.
Мною принято решение о проведении специальной военной операции.
These are our people that are dying every day because these missiles and drones are still able to fly.
Dual goods that are found in the battlefield.
The U.S. and other countries have sanctioned Vladimir Putin directly for the invasion.
Armenian trade with Russia has increased like 300-400% since 2022.
Росія у Вірменії використовує різні методи обходу санкцій.
Dual-use goods, which can be non-military goods like washing machines, can be then dismantled and they are used for military purposes inside Russia.
All these components were produced by the countries who provided the sanctions against the Russia.
So the trade is two ways: banned Western goods, which are sanctioned, going through Armenia, and Russian goods going out, like diamond, golds, and other expensive raw materials going out from Russia through Armenia to the West.
There is a reluctance on the side of the Western institutions to impose any sanctions on Armenia.
Inside Politics delves deeply into the heart of global issues shaping our world today. Join me for your go-to source of political analysis from across the region and beyond.
Welcome back. You're watching Prime Time. Okay, let's now head to our correspondents in their regions as we start. And we start in the mountains of Azerbaijan at an international alpine skiing competition. It's underway in Shardag, drawing female athletes from several countries. Now, the tournament marks Azerbaijan's first time hosting an event of this level in alpine skiing. Our correspondent Narticek Yahangarili has more.
We are reporting from the Caucasus Mountains, where the temperature is slightly below zero. An international alpine skiing tournament has kicked off in Shardag, with 20 women competing down the snowy slopes. The tournament opened with the alpine skiing slalom event, and the first results are already in. Georgia's Nino Tsiklauri placed first, Switzerland's Anna Nikita second, and Kazakhstan's Talkunova Daley third. Behind me you see athletes competing competing for the second run at more than 200 meters high. Skiers from Switzerland, Hungary, Georgia, Slovenia, Turkey, Saudi Arabia, the United Kingdom, Kazakhstan, Uzbekistan, Nepal and Hong Kong are competing to decide who is the best. Azerbaijan is represented by Anastasia Papatoma. The competition continues until January 10 with slalom and giant slalom events ahead. Azerbaijan's mountain resort is hosting such an event for the first time, and to be fair, the view is truly breathtaking. What we see here is mountains against people, and yet these athletes tame them professionally. We have seen some bold performances. The track is ruthless. Even the smallest mistakes cost athletes dearly. This is all for now, but we will be here in the coming days to follow the tournament. Narçiçek Cihangirli, together with Natik Mehmetli and İlkin Mehdiyev, A News.
Now to something more serious, and tensions between Georgia's leadership, the European Union and civil society are once again in the spotlight. Recent statements by the Speaker of the Parliament have reignited debate over Georgia's European path and the limits of external influence. And Nini Nikolashvili has more.
A sharp political and cultural debate is unfolding in Georgia after Parliament Speaker Shavol Gopashvili accused the European Union and EU-funded organizations of fueling division, hatred and violence inside the country. Speaking to journalists, Papashvili defended the Georgian Orthodox Church and the Patriarch's recent epistle on freedom of speech, warning that words, when weaponized, can undermine social harmony and damage individuals morally as well as psychologically. He called on society to rely on long-standing religious and cultural traditions rather than what he described as ideologies promoted from abroad. The speaker also criticized public discussions about changing the date of Christmas celebrations from January 7 to December 25, arguing that such debates risk deepening polarization. According to him, similar divisions have emerged around historical memory, public demonstrations, and the activities of non-governmental organizations, which he says often receive foreign funding. European institutions reject these accusations, maintaining that their support for civil society, freedom of expression, and independent media is aimed at strengthening democratic resilience. EU representatives argue that pluralism and open debate are essential for any country seeking for closer integration with Europe, including Georgia. The clash reflects a deeper and persistent pattern in Georgian politics, where almost every major social, cultural, or political issue becomes absorbed into an ongoing cycle of polarization. Debates over religion, freedom of speech, foreign influence, and European integration increasingly unfold not as policy discussions, but as symbols in a broader struggle between competing political narratives. Nini Nikolashvili, Tbilisi, A News.
Iran's army chief has warned against US-Israel hostile rhetoric, saying Tehran assesses intensification of their rhetoric against the Islamic Republic as a threat, which he promised will be answered. Our correspondent in Tehran has more.
Iran's army commander-in-chief, Major General Amir Hatami, said Tehran considers the intensification of the enemy's rhetoric against the Iranian nation as a threat and will not leave it unanswered. According to state media, he made the warning in an address to senior military students at the Army Command and Staff Academy in Tehran on Wednesday. Iran's army chief was referring to remarks by US President Donald Trump and Israeli Prime Minister Benjamin Netanyahu about renewed attacks against Iran in the wake of ongoing protests to rising prices. General Hatami said that the preparedness of the Iranian armed forces is far greater than before the Israel-US 12-day military aggression last June, and stated if the enemy makes a mistake, it will receive a decisive response. Amid rising tensions with the United States and Israel, Iran's newly formed Defense Council warned that Tehran could respond before an attack if it detected clear signs of a threat. raising the possibility of a preemptive action. Also, Iran's foreign ministry condemned what it termed the interventionist and deceptive remarks made by US officials regarding Iran's internal developments, describing them a clear sign of the continued hostility of the US government toward the people of Iran. Meantime, Foreign Minister Abbas Araghchi ruled out the possibility of renewed Tehran-Washington negotiations under current circumstances. He told reporters after a cabinet meeting on Wednesday that it was not the right time to hold a new round of talks with the United States. Iran's top diplomat stated that it was not Iran which left the negotiating table, adding that the US government does not follow a policy of negotiations with Tehran at the moment. Turaj Shiralilu, Tehran, A News.
To China now, where a new smart power grid system is being rolled out, capable of restoring electricity almost instantly after a blackout. The technology is designed to prevent disruptions from spreading and to keep power networks stable. It's now being shared with a number of countries, highlighting China's growing role in global energy infrastructure.
China has begun rolling out an advanced smart power grid technology capable of restoring electricity in just 0.1 seconds after a blackout, a breakthrough that is now being shared with 12 countries, the list of which has not been disclosed publicly. The ultra-fast recovery system is designed to protect power networks from sudden disruptions caused by equipment failures, extreme weather, or sharp fluctuations in electricity demand, significantly reducing the risk of large-scale outages. The technology works by using intelligent sensors and automated control systems that can detect faults almost instantly and reroute power before disruptions cascade across the grid. By cutting blackout recovery time to 1/10 of a second, the system helps maintain stability, protects critical infrastructure, and minimizes economic losses linked to power interruptions. Experts say such rapid response capability is becoming increasingly important as countries integrate renewable energy sources, electric vehicles, and more complex digital systems into their power networks. Chinese officials and engineers say the export of this technology highlights China's growing role in global energy infrastructure and its capacity to provide high-end technical solutions to shared challenges. With climate change increasing the frequency of extreme weather events and placing greater strain on power systems worldwide, the technology is expected to play a larger role in ensuring the safe, stable, and continuous distribution of electricity across borders. Manu Martin, A News, Beijing.
Now let's take a look at a couple of other top stories from around the world. The US has seized 2 Venezuelan-linked vessels, including a Russian-flagged tanker in the North Atlantic and the Caribbean. The UK Air Force said it provided intelligence and air support in tracking and intercepting the ships. Well, Moscow has condemned the seizure of its tanker and demanded that Russians on board are sent back home.
The United States says it seized 2 vessels linked to Venezuela on Wednesday in coordinated operations in the Atlantic and Caribbean. US European Command said it took control of a Russian-flagged oil tanker in the North Atlantic. The ship, now named Marinera and formerly the Bella One, was seized under a US federal court warrant for alleged sanctions violations. Shortly afterwards, US Southern Command reported the interception of a second vessel in the Caribbean, described as stateless and suspected of illicit activity. Homeland Security Secretary Kristi Noem said both ships were last docked in or bound for Venezuela, and the operations involved close coordination with the US Coast Guard. The United Kingdom confirmed it provided surveillance and logistical support to the Atlantic operation at Washington's request.
The US's enforcement action was based upon counter-Iran sanctions aimed at stopping Iran from fueling instability through the profits of illegal oil sales. The UK supported this action to achieve 3 objectives. First, to enforce counter-Iran sanctions. Second, to tackle the global security threat posed by expanding shadowy maritime activity. And third, to reinforce British homeland defence and security in this era of rising threats.
Analysts say the Marinera's boarding underscores rising tensions over sanctions and opaque tanker networks.
The shadow fleet and the boarding of the Marinera tanker, previously known Bella 1, after it obtained the Russian flag, is a telling example. Certainly a move bound to raise tensions with Russia and risks escalation. But the Trump administration likely found that stepping back would show weakness, and hence whether actions against Russia flagged or even Chinese flagged vessels will continue is to be seen, but remain secondary to the priority of enforcement of sanctions on Venezuela.
Russia's transport ministry condemned the seizure, calling it a violation of international law. In Caracas, Venezuela's Interior Minister Diosdado Cabello said on Wednesday about 100 people were killed in the US attack that ousted President Nicolas Maduro, marking the first official death toll.
Flights at Venezuela's international airport have dropped following the resumption of operations. The country's main airport was closed after US military strikes last Saturday that led to the capture of Nicolas Maduro.
Venezuela's main international airport has recorded a sharp drop in flights after resuming operations following a closure triggered by a US military strike last Saturday. On Tuesday, the second day after reopening, flight information screens at Simon Bolivar International Airport showed just 8 incoming international flights. A further 9 international arrivals were scheduled for Wednesday, well below normal levels for an airport that serves as the country's primary international gateway. Despite the reduced traffic, some Venezuelan passengers say the swift reopening demonstrated the country's resilience in the face of crisis.
As a country, Venezuela has demonstrated its great ability to recover and adapt to changes. In the face of severe geopolitical and economic turbulences, we have shown incredible resilience, enabling markets, trade and airports to quickly resume operations under heavy pressure.
Following the strike, the US Federal Aviation Administration and the European Union Aviation Safety Agency advised operators to exercise caution when flying over Venezuela. The US government initially banned all US registered aircraft from operating not only in Venezuela, but also in the airspace of Puerto Rico, Curaçao, and the western part of the Piarco Flight Information Region. That ban, imposed on the 3rd of January, was later replaced by a security notice to air missions, tentatively valid through to the 2nd of February, warning operators of potentially hazardous conditions in the affected airspace.
Well, that brings us to the end of Prime Time. Please do join us tomorrow evening for plenty more news and analysis. And from all of us here at A News, thanks for watching.